We segue now to the question of honoring an institution that is well known to specialists, but most are not specialists, and an institution that is well deserving of being honored and rewarded, and people be made more aware and appreciative of. It has to do with the Kuwait Fund for Arab Economic Development. It's the oldest of the Middle East development infrastructure, financial, developmental assistance institutions and organizations. One is now familiar with others, but they've all patterned themselves on the scale and the model and the example of the Kuwait Fund, which was established in 1961, shortly after Kuwait obtained its full independence from Great Britain, which for decades had administered Kuwait's defense in its foreign relations. It so happened as the United States government began to tighten its belt. How's that? Belting its tight. It's a good phrase, isn't it? Tighten its belt on budgetary cutbacks there. And 98% of America's economic assistance to the world's less fortunate went to around 5 countries. But the Kuwait Fund is more than 120 countries that benefit from that one organization versus mainly 5 from the United States. And if you ask most Americans on the street, how much money do you think from our government's budget goes to foreign aid, to other countries, to those, to them, to the others? And many will say 20%, 25%. It's not even 2% of the U.S. government. And yet we're the richest country in history, richest country in the world in terms of material well-being. So we have a self-image of being the world's most generous, but the facts are otherwise. If you take the following 2 frames of reference, ponder the implications of what this means and what we have, what needs to be cherished, treasured, and defended there. Kuwait has been number 1 since 1961 among all world organizations, governments, in terms of the percentage of its material wealth that it shares with the less fortunate of the world. Number 1. We're way up there in terms of the aggregate, but not in terms of percentage of our GDP, which is 21 trillion and counting. The runner-up, the one that scares the daylights out of so many, is 18 trillion, that's China. America still has the lead in terms of research and development. More than 1/3 of all research dollars that help to improve the lives of humanity are from American research laboratories and firms. And if you take into consideration American subsidiaries, Europe, Asia, Africa, Latin America, and elsewhere, it's 40-some% of all of the research development monies that go to improve lives. Look at the technology in this auditorium. Look at the mobile phones. Look at the electronic communications. Look at the instantaneous ways of being in touch and saving lives and easing lives and making life more bearable, leisurely or productively or otherwise. If you take in terms of consideration individuals, we all have a self-image that no one is more charitable than we are. Not true. Among the world's peoples, we're 17th. Most of the European countries give more per capita to charitable causes than we do. We think we're number 1. These are World Bank and IMF statistics. We're number 17. So this aspect of thinking we're number 1, we, us, is the epitome of arrogance. And it's just a lens, a prism, through which so many look at Americans and how Americans see themselves, but not how always others see Americans. So this Kuwait Fund has been referred to by the United States government when countries have come to Uncle Simon, Aunt Samantha, and say, hey, fine fella, can you spare me a dime? We're undergoing famine at the present time. We have floods, we have earthquake, we have pestilence, we have a tsunami. Can you help? And we said, well, we just don't have it there. Call Kuwait. And one of the reasons we don't know about Kuwait and its largesse and its financial humanitarian contributions to lessen the burdens of the trouble amongst humanity is because of an Islamic value, and that is to not call attention to yourself, to be a third person singular, not a first person singular there. And during the period when Kuwait was under occupation and the victim of aggression in 1990 from August until late February, many people said no blood for oil. I took a delegation every single month for 12 months, one after the other, to Kuwait of American leaders, and virtually every one of them said, I'm ashamed of myself. I was one of those who marched in the parades of no blood for oil there. And how many knew what I just mentioned in terms of what Kuwait represented, that Kuwait would not have broadcast to the rest of the world, in keeping with the Islamic value of focusing on the other more than on the self. There's one country, for example, that had a government that voted against sending armed forces to Saudi Arabia so that the invasion would not spread beyond Kuwait. And it so happened that that particular country, the largest employer outside of the government, was a hotel chain, 18 hotels in that country, owned by Kuwait. But the workers themselves did not know that. And so sometimes when you don't broadcast what you're doing, it can come back to hit and hurt you. But by and large, no. The example is, don't tell the other that I'm your benefactor. If I provide a scholarship to some of the young students here in this room, from the moment they know I'm the person that does it, they will be deferential to me, referential to me. Hi, Dr. Anthony. Hi, thank you, Dr. Anthony. I'm doing what I'm doing only because of you. Thank you, thank you. The entire relationship would change, the chemistry, the body language, the communications, the whole value complex in our relationship. And why? If I'm the more lucky, the more fortunate than they. And why? Because they have a legitimate need, a legitimate concern, a legitimate interest in becoming more educated. Why should the relationship change between the two of us if I'm the more fortunate than they are? And so we salute this particular organization that has not called attention to itself, but has done such a remarkable degree of work in lessening the travails of humanity. It's the Kuwait Fund for Arab Economic Development, and its Director General Marwan Al-Ghanim has worked his way up to this position to represent this mother, this pearl of all of the developmental economic assistance organizations in the Arab region, the Middle East, the Islamic world. And we have the ambassador of Kuwait, Jassim Budai, who's former president, head of the Kuwait mission to the United Nations, with us as well. With the Kuwait Fund representatives, please come forward. Yes, sir. Mr. Ambassador, we won't feel safe unless you're here. Yes. I want you visually to see something that will go beyond and surpass my words about the work of this fund. Ladies and gentlemen, we now have the privilege, pleasure, and honor of doing something we've never done before, and that is to present the first ever Distinguished Global Developmental Assistance Award to the Kuwait Fund for Arab Economic Development in recognition of its humanitarian efforts to raise and retain the standard of living of peoples and communities throughout the world. To accept it, we have its Director General, Marwan El Ghanem, to accept this award, along with the Ambassador of Kuwait, Jassim Al-Badai.
Super. Just a couple minutes.
Thank you very much, Anthony, Dr. Anthony. I think you covered everything that I want to mention. Let me first mention that I'm honored to be here. And not only honored to be here, also in the presence of His Highness Prince Turki bin Faisal, and I don't see him, Ambassador Edward Ghanem. Those two figures are a very dear friend to the Kuwaiti throughout their life. I'm not... As I mentioned, Dr. Anthony mentioned everything about Kuwait Fund. Let me tell you about a tiny country in the northern east of the Arabian Peninsula. Immediately after the liberation, after the independence from the British ruler, at that time, the fathers of Kuwait, at the time of late Sheikh Abdullah Salim al-Sabah, we called him the father of the Constitution of Kuwait, thought of the neighboring country, where at that time the late Emir Sheikh Jabir al-Ahmed Sabah was the Minister of Finance. They thought of the establishment of Kuwait Fund to assist the neighboring country, especially the Arab country, with the God gift of the oil production. They established the fund at that time, as mentioned, 1961. And we operate in most of the Arab country, neighboring country, until mid-70. Then the first expansion of our operation to cover Africa and Southeast Asia. And the third expansion was immediately after the liberation of Kuwait from the Iraqi aggression, where we covered the Eastern Europe and the Latin America. Kuwait Fund now operates in 107 countries. Throughout those years, we financed more than 1,000 loans to various projects in different sectors. My colleague mentioned in his tape about Egypt. Egypt is the first recipient country from Kuwait Fund resources. And the tape mentioned Bahr al-Baqar, water treatment program. It should have more on that project. This project is gained up, I think, more than 6 international awards as the largest water treatment program. Proudly to say that we, Kuwait Fund, with the cooperation with the Arab Fund, headquartered also in Kuwait, with the cooperation with the International Cooperation Ministry in Egypt, we finance that project. Kuwait Fund will continue assisting continuous operation, assisting different countries throughout the year. It's the lending arm of the government of Kuwait. At that time, we still do this duty, representing the state of Kuwait government in different international organizations like the IMF and the African Development Bank. We've been in one of the first responses to the Chernobyl disaster, representing also Kuwait Fund, State of Kuwait in the Chernobyl Recovery Fund. We responded to the United States plead for the Afghan crisis, and we continue to do that. The list is a long list, to be frank with you. But once again, I'm very honored to represent Kuwait here, the Kuwait Fund, and thank you for this recognition. Thank you very much.
Make a segue.
Yeah, make a segue.
Here you go. If you allow me, yeah, we are, this is just, حياكم محمد. This is a talking about Kuwait Fund. You know Arabic, right? Well, the logo of Kuwait Fund is written in Arabic. It's the Kuwait Fund for Arab Economic Development.
المؤسس.
And it's my honor to present this. Thank you very much.
Great, super. Before we break for lunch, there's one segue remark here that when Kuwait was invaded and occupied in 1990, this was right when the Soviet Union had imploded. And the 77 years of efforts to spread atheistic, godless communism to other countries ignominiously failed. At the time, it cut off the economic assistance to its East European satellite countries, 5 of which in particular had no oil or gas. And they asked the United States, please help. This is the fuel that drives your economy and our economy and every economy. We're talking about the United States saying we just don't have it. No other country said we have it. One country did. We're talking about Bulgaria, Romania, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, and Poland. These 5 had an infusion put on life support because of Kuwait. We talk about the need for leadership in the world. We have leaders. We have plenty of leaders. What we need are statespeople, statesmen, stateswomen. We need the Mandelas. We need the de Gaulles. We need the Mother Teresa's there. And we need institutions and individuals who lead them, like Marwan El-Ghanem and his staff. Please salute these people who are the unsung heroes who realize that if you don't insist on taking credit for something, you can do 10 times as much. And look what this institution has done. Thank you, sir. Thank you.